Hey, this is Brainwaves and I'm going to show you how to create sustained basses using my song Bass Gang as an example. This whole project file, as usual, is available on my Patreon along with many others, so feel free to check the link in the description if you want to get it, and let's get started. So to create that sustained bass and all of its variations, I'm just going to start by breaking down the layers. So first I have a sub bass, which in this case I'm just using the hip hop sub bass. Then I have a sub harmonics layer, which is once again the hip hop sub bass, but I'm using a little bit of amp with these parameters and then erosion with these parameters in here. And lastly, I have an EQ just boosting some of those harmonics in the sub. So that's how that sounds. So those two layers, they sound like this. And that's like the foundation for like the low end of the sound. Then I have the layers that go on the mid and upper range. So all of them, they sound like this. Something to take note of is that the group has a couple of OTTs. I'm using Xfer OTT, which is a free plugin, but you could also use Ableton's multiband compressor with the OTT preset and it would work the same way. So the only thing that I'm changing here is the depth, which is at 41% on each of them. And then I'm cutting everything below 150 and everything above 14,000. So without that, it sounds like this. I'm just compressing the sound a little bit, making it louder and just making sure that there is no unnecessary low end in there. So let's check out each layer individually. This is the main one that you hear. So I'm just gonna mute the post-processing of that and I'll show you what's going on inside Serum. I'm just gonna mute all of this. All that I'm using is the default saw wave wavetable in here. There is some reverb throw going on in the synth group, so that's why you hear that reverb automation. But inside of the Serum patch, I just have, as I said, the default wavetable, and I put some chorus on it. So with these parameters, that's just making it wider. Then I put some distortion. And this is the trick of this sound. I'm using the pre-filtering here, which basically applies this filter before the distortion and then it applies the distortion. And I have a couple of modulations. With the first LFO, I'm modulating the frequency of the pre-filter and then also the mix of the distortion itself. And you can see that this is set on envelope mode, 1/16th rate. And that would give it like its character to the sound. You can play a lot with this and get like different sustained basses. I'm gonna show you real quick. But before I do that, there is also the envelope one, which is having a modulation of the drive in here. If I don't do that, the sound will ring through after it's finished. So let me show you. If I do this, it has like that ringy tone afterwards, which I don't want. So that's why I use the envelope one just to control the volume. As I was mentioning, you can change some of these parameters and get like cool results. You could change the distortion frequency. That's a different type of sustain that you could use. Yep. Definitely can use all of that. So yeah, I thought of sharing this because it's like a really easy way to create like sustained basses. Something important is that the bandwidth it's very high. So if I take the bandwidth down, it's not the same sound. So keep the bandwidth high and play with this distortion frequency. You could also play with the position of the filter in terms of low pass, band pass, or high pass. But I found that that low pass is what works best. Lastly, I just put a compressor afterwards, multiband, these parameters. Outside of Serum, I set a frequency shifter, and I'm using this to make variations of the sustain bass. So just by putting this on shift mode and with the fine tuning all the way down and with the frequency around this range, I got like this type of sound, which I liked better for this track. And once again, you can just play with this to get different type of sounds. But yeah, in my case, this one was like the best setting. And I'm just playing with the fine tuning. As you can see, I'm sending the fine tuning to 243. And then in the second part of the drop, I enabled another frequency shifter and I just play with some of the values. I'm not overthinking too much of like what values I put in here. I just experiment with it. Oh, and yeah, the dry wet, I pull it down a little bit, and also I have this auto pan to create that little tremolo motion. Without it, sounds more sustained, but with it, it gives it like a nice motion. Without this. So the dry wet difference is also helping with the motion. So yeah, just experiment with Shifter. It's a cool plugin, and if you add like 2 instances of it and play with it individually, it can get like pretty cool results. Lastly, I just put a EQ, and I'm just cutting the low end and boosting around the mid-range, around like 1700. So that's for the main layer. Then I have a couple extra layers like this one, which is more of a rhythmic layer, and that's what is important about the sustained basses. I feel like if you want to make them interesting, you need to have like rhythmic patterns like behind them to support like the sustained bass, if that makes sense. So this one, for example, is doing that motion, and if I check the preset, is pretty much the same post-processing as before. Change a little bit of the frequency in here and also the LFO. Now it's looking like this, which is helping with the character of the sound. So let me show you what it's doing. So yeah, trigger mode 1/8. Pretty similar post-processing with Shifter without it. Could also work, but I just found this more interesting for the track and more fitting. And around the head is just a cool Ableton preset that just pans things to the left and to the right. In here, I'm just cutting everything below 300. For the second part of the drop, I just put the frequency to this value. and it gives me like a different nice sounding variation. This one is a cool one. I really like the sound. So let me show you how that's done. The preset sounds like this. And what is happening here is there is 2 sine waves. Both of them are 4 octaves up. And I'm playing the octave 0 in here, as you can see. And what you need to do is create this sort of shape and modulate the chorus pitch with that. Without it, nothing special at all, but when you modulate that, it gives you that sound. I'm also doing FM from B, 61%. And the chorus pitch of this one is at 64% and this one at 59%. So there's a lot of room for experimentation in here. I hope you guys get inspired by this type of stuff. So then on my post-processing, I have hyperdimension, phaser, compression, delay, and EQ. So just gonna hover through some of this so you can pause and copy the parameters if you're following along. Yep, so without the post-processing, it's similar. I'm just, giving it a little bit of a boost and shaping the sound a little bit further. Then outside of the patch, once again, the frequency shifter. So I probably just copy and pasted the same shifter instance. So EQ just cutting the low end and the top end, and auto panning just because I wanted the sound to be a little bit more in control and in the rhythm. For this section, there is something interesting. I was just playing with the fine knob and I created like this going up motion. Which just helps a lot with the evolution of the drop. There's 2 layers more, so this one is pretty simple. It's just a white noise from operator. That's all that is. It's just, helping to bring everything up and to make it all sound like a little bit bigger. In the second part of the drop, I just put some auto pan with a tremolo movement in here. But yeah, it's just white noise. And then lastly, there is this block which has this very simple like 2-note melody, F sharp to G and back. This is just a preset from somewhere, it's not mine, and I'm just using wider, cutting the low end and adding some hash effect with this delay, just making it wider once again. All the layers together sounds like this. So yeah, it would be a lot different if I just had like the sustain. It wouldn't be as interesting. But when I add all of this, it just makes it way more interesting. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the sustain basis of the drop. I'll continue with the rest. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this whole project file is available on my Patreon if you want to get it, along with many other project files. Also, I'm doing one-on-one lessons. Check the link in the description. Please leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment, and I hope I see you around. Roll with the bass like